Yo guys, I'm Dunmere. I'm a top 100 Overwatch player and now rank 3 Supervive player, and here is a Celeste guide for you that I put together with my over 400 hours of playtesting this game. Let's start with Celeste's abilities. Celeste's primary fire is a rapid fire barrage of homing ice darts. Each ice dart that hits deals some damage and applies one of Celeste's passive stacks to the enemy. Once 8 have been applied to an enemy, it triggers her passive ability, exploding for a high burst of AoE damage. The stacks will be removed if a new one isn't applied within a moderate time frame though. Celeste's secondary fire is a 2-charge Ice Spear. This ability travels out and will explode if it hits an enemy, an obstacle, or the targeted location. The explosion deals AoE damage and produces a heavy slow zone, which explodes again after a short delay for additional damage. For Celeste's movement ability, she has a long distance skate dash. This dash can be held to skate for a long distance, or cancelled early for a shorter dash and a partially reduced cooldown. Celeste's primary fire also deals extra damage when skating. Celeste's E ability is an Ice Wall. After a short duration, Celeste casts an ice wall that travels out from her, blocking damage sources and pushing enemies back. Celeste and allies can shoot and cast abilities through the ice wall, and it will also travel through any map obstacles. Celeste's ultimate ability is a large radius ice explosion. When Celeste uses her ultimate, she becomes an ice block, gaining complete damage immunity and producing a slow zone around her. She can reactivate this ability at any time to exit, but will explode for damage and a stun if she waits to the end of the ability. However, Celeste can still be pushed by many knockbacks while in this ultimate. Finally, we have Celeste's passive. With this, any of Celeste's AoE damage sources will apply a frozen condition to enemies hit by it for a few seconds. If they are knocked with this status condition on, they will explode for the same AoE damage burst as their primary fire gets, dealing damage to any nearby ally caught in it. Having finished the abilities, let's move on to the strengths and weaknesses, starting with the strengths. Celeste's first core strength is her excellent zoning utility. Not only does she have a powerful wall that blocks damage and pushes enemies away, but she also has 2 other forms of defensive utility. She has her 2-charge Ice Spears that have a powerful slow on them, while also having a huge AoE slowing and stunning ultimate that gives her invulnerability. While these are powerful enough on their own, she doesn't have the common mobility weakness of the Zoner Controller archetype. This is her second core strength, her excellent mobility. Despite having a large assortment of these CC abilities, she has top roster levels of mobility also, which is amazing in Supervive as she can easily use it to avoid unexpected danger, but also to reliably escape to res her team with it. Yet on top of this, she can use all of her CC abilities even more effectively with this mobility. She can aggro push enemies with wall, use it to get a good angle for a slow spear, or even toss her AoE ultimate into the enemy with her mobility. Though this is quite a powerful set of strengths so far, Celeste also has her third core strength, which is her high ranged pressure. Despite having such great ability to defend herself and allies at close range with CC abilities, Celeste also has excellent range on her primary fire damage. Though the individual darts don't deal too much, they pop for quite a chunk that enemies must respect. Add in a solid range on her Ice Spears, and Celeste can apply huge pressure to enemies at range. Now, let's go into the weaknesses. Though she isn't burdened with many weaknesses, Celeste does have inconsistency in her damage output. Much of it is locked behind conditional situations, like securing a full 8 stacks with primary fire, catching an enemy with an ending explosion of her Ice Spears, or actually managing to hit enemies with her ultimate. She provides more than enough without having to do the actual damage, but she still definitely lacks in this area. In addition to this is her second weakness, that her ultimate can often be just a kill me button. Though her ultimate has massive potential, it is both very tempting to overuse or overcommit with, while also not allowing her to move during use. If it's used too early when enemies aren't very threatened, or left at a predictable time, enemies can easily catch Celeste with a kill's worth of damage as she exits the ultimate, transforming it from a huge power source to what really is just a big flag asking to be killed. With the strengths and weaknesses covered, let's now move on to how to actually play Celeste. Since Celeste is a Zoner Controller character, the vast majority of her value comes from how she can manipulate the enemy team with her range poke and her CC abilities. This means she really wants to play slow and outrange enemies with her primary fire, while using her slowing Ice Spear zones to catch enemies at choke points or force them off of dangerous side angles. This playstyle lets her either sap enemies of resources over time, or force them into aggressive misplays that she can counter with her wall or ultimate. Either way, she wins when she keeps up the range pressure while holding her wall, ultimate, and dash to counter the enemy. While oppositely, she loses a lot of value when she wastes her abilities to try and force things, or is forced to use them unideally due to not positioning or reacting well, most importantly with her wall and ultimate. So with that as a general overview, what are the specifics for how you actually play her? First, I'll cover some specifics for each ability and then show how to apply these into a cohesive playstyle. Celeste's primary fire's entire goal is to secure 8 stacks on an enemy and proc an explosion. However, it is a bit quirky. The ice darts self-slow when nearing an enemy and then hone toward them, so you really need to fire where an enemy is heading or on both sides of them if they're standing still. Otherwise, the shots will just fall behind the enemy's movement and not hit them at all. The primary comes out in a flurry of shots, and then slows down for a few more rapid projectiles, but it's still best to cancel the primary when the flurry of darts finishes though, and then reuse it again. The quick darts after fire too slow and will significantly reduce your overall damage output. For Celeste's Ice Spears, Celeste has a larger set of ways they can be used. They are quite effective when used entirely to control enemy positioning, either to threaten enemies with a slow and explosion who are trying to take an aggressive side angle, or simply used to slow enemies walking through choke points and keep them in that dangerous spot longer. Land the slow zone on an enemy when they'll have to go all the way through it to escape, and this can secure an opportunity for you to dash onto them and pump them full of easy to hit ice darts. In addition to these use cases, you can just use the ice spears for raw damage in a situation like surprising an enemy, as an ice spear combo with a primary fire explosion proc will get them dangerously low. Yet the ice spears will also have a powerful defensive utility on top of this. Throw one at your own feet when jumped onto by an enemy, and they'll be a much easier target for your allies and yourself to land their shots on and force out. If they stay too long and get hit by the explosion after, they may even end up dying. It's important to note that the ice spear zone will go the exact distance of your cursor when you use it, so make sure to aim exactly where you want it to go, or the shot might go too far or too short. Similarly to the ice spears, Celeste Walls has a large variety of use cases. Defensively, you can counter enemy team engagements onto you, push away enemies on aggressive angles, buy your team time to heal up when they've taken too much damage, or just completely force out a full team off an island. It's easy to mess up the mechanics of using this ability though, as your turn speed is heavily limited when using it and you're forced into a long animation. It's relatively easy for enemies to sneak past your wall if they are highly mobile because of the turn speed limitation, so misuse this and you can sometimes be killed while being stuck creating the wall. So it's important to predict when enemies will engage, aim your wall starting angle properly, and position yourself well. Also, the wall can be attacked through by you and your team, so it can sometimes be used to secure a raw damage advantage in a 1v1 or 2v2 kind of situation late into a fight. As for Celeste's skate dash, it is very flexible and has a lot of options on top of being just useful for repositioning. It can be used to push aggro onto a caught out enemy target, with it offering bonus damage while skating, used with wall to get right on top of the enemy and to push them, or used to toss ult into the enemy team. However, it's important to think ahead about how far of a dash you actually need to use when using it. Especially for minor repositions, it's extremely valuable to cancel dash early as it refunds much of the cooldown. The short reposition will often be exactly as needed, and you'll have the dash back much faster for when you need it for another skate. For Celeste's ultimate, it's much more than just a huge burst of damage and stun. Though it offers great defensive utility to counter an enemy push or when you get surrounded, and also has great offensive ability to punish a team lacking defensive cooldowns and dashes, it offers huge potential otherwise. It is amazing as a panic button to protect Celeste when she gets caught out. Though you shouldn't be planning to use it like such, it situationally can offer great value, even against a single ability that could lead to your death. Similarly, the threat of the ultimate can be more than effective enough of a use method, as enemies will usually be forced to flee when it's used, but will also usually be able to escape it. Regardless, it's extremely important to think about what situation you'll be in after the ultimate goes off. Often you'll be stuck being exploded by enemies if you predictably go through the whole ult animation. Instead, if there's risk, you should exit early when you think enemies won't expect, and then skate away or use wall to escape. Just make sure you didn't waste both before popping the ultimate. Also, the ult can deal the full explosion slightly before the full ultimate timer, so when there's around a tenth of the bar remaining, you can go ahead and explode it early by leaving it early. Just whenever you're using this ability, don't expect to get an ultimate off against an Oath with shield, or a Celeste with wall, as both abilities can block the explosion. So with the specifics covered, how does this all wrap up into an overall playstyle for Celeste? Celeste's general gameplay follows a sort of flowchart. First, Celeste should default to a neutral poke playstyle, playing within moderate range of the center of your team. She should constantly be outputting her primary fires while looking for ice spear opportunities. Most enemies will have a significantly shorter max range than Celeste, so they'll be forced to take damage to get in range. This sort of pressure will often open them up to ice spear opportunities. They may just try and predictably force themselves directly at you, which will leave them open to an ice spear catching them out, or one casted at your feet to slow and damage them as they get right on top of you. Otherwise, you'll look for a flank opportunity that you can similarly shut down with an ice slow as they commit a bit into the open. Throw it where they are going, or trap them by putting it between them and their best source of cover, and they'll be vulnerable to more of your ice darts and allied damage after. Celeste really wants to keep enemies in this situation, holding them with primaries and ice spears, but it's okay to give a bit of ground if needed, so enemies can be stuck walking into ice darts and your allied damage for longer. But the situation likely isn't always going to stay like this, which is what a Celeste should hold her wall and ultimate for. The wall is best used as Celeste's first line of defense against more serious situations, like if the enemy all dives your team together, if an enemy on a side angle pressures your team too heavily, or you start to get surrounded. So a wall should be used to counter these situations. This may also require a short skate too, just to get the right spacing for the wall. Though it's best to stick to a short dash as the fight will be starting to break down and not having skate available will become very risky. At this point, the enemy is either low on resources but still holding on, or is quite healthy and overrunning your team. Celeste's ultimate is ideal for both these situations. So it's good to start looking for important cooldowns being missing. These can be something like a Celeste wall or Oath shield, or knockback like Huntress's shoving arrow. Though there are too many abilities that can counter your ultimate to get them all out reliably, once some of these are used by the enemies and the enemy has used some of their dashes, Celeste can look to counter dash into the enemy with ultimate to clean them all up. Use this too early though, and it's likely to only force them away. However, in the situation that Celeste's team is losing, waiting for these cooldowns isn't really an option. Yet you still can pop the ultimate just to threaten the enemies away for a moment, so your team can recover a little bit. Just remember to exit the ultimate early so you can dash back to safety after. At this point, the fight will usually be won or lost, so you should use your dash to chase enemies or escape from them. But in the case of it still being neutral, Celeste will shine by just using dash to reposition near max range, and then pelting the enemies with more primary fires in slow zones like it's the beginning of the fight again. Yet you sometimes won't have the luxury of playing slow and steady on Celeste. This may be in a congested game where the circle has become very small and you need to push an enemy team out of somewhere, or if you're getting held out in the storm by an enemy team. In these situations, Celeste's playstyle needs to change. Specifically, it needs to rapidly speed up. So in a situation like this, Celeste needs to take control of the situation and go in. She should aggro dive into the enemy team while activating her wall. If the location you're pushing into is small, you can throw the dash and wall straight into the enemy's core. But if it's wider, then you want to skate to the side of the enemy team and throw the wall so it hits one of the enemies on the edge of their team and forces them into the center, kind of like you're scraping them off of the edge. Then you should throw ice spears where the enemies were once the wall is gone. This will stop enemies from going back where they were just pushed out of. Also, if the wall grouped enemies a lot, you can just throw your spears on top of the enemy group for damage. However, you'll likely have to use your ult shortly after the spears since your objective is to hold the space that you just bought for your team. If you can, you should still hold your ultimate for as long as possible, especially when engaging into an enemy Celeste. As before, the more cooldowns they are missing when you ult, the more reliably you can safely commit to the full ultimate, and the higher chance you'll hit your enemies. While you'll be forced into this sort of playstyle sometimes, you always want to keep your team stabilized and set up so you can revert to playing slower again. Keep these strategies in mind, and you'll be giving your team the best chance for this to happen.